They say the most dangerous blind spot a man can have is his own family. My name is Hank, and for 40 years I made a living finding the hidden truths in financial ledgers that powerful men tried to bury. I was a forensic accountant, a hunter of fraud. But the biggest fraud of my life wasn't in a corporate spreadsheet. He was sitting at my dinner table, eating the food I paid for, living in the house my sacrifice built. My son-in-law thought I was just a senile old man, a burden to be managed and eventually discarded. He thought my silence was weakness. He forgot that I know how to wait. He forgot that I know how to watch. And he certainly forgot that when you back a man into a corner, you better make sure he doesn't have a plan to bring the whole house down on top of you. Before I tell you how I turned the tables on the people who betrayed me, I want to know something from you. Have you ever sacrificed everything for someone who later treated you like trash? Tell me your story in the comments below, and please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps more than you know. Now let me take you back to the moment the glass shattered and my eyes finally opened. The sound was not just a crack, it was an explosion. The crystal tumbler, a piece of heavy cut glass that had belonged to my late wife, hit the marble island in the kitchen and disintegrated. But I did not drop it. It was slapped out of my hand. Before my brain could even register the loss of the glass, the back of a hand collided with my cheekbone. The force of the blow was shocking. It was not a playful tap. It was a strike meant to hurt, meant to dominate. My knees, already weak from years of arthritis, buckled instantly. The world tilted sideways, and the cold hardness of the kitchen floor rushed up to meet me. My hips slammed against the tiles, sending a jolt of electricity up my spine, but the pain in my face was sharper. It was a burning, throbbing heat that spread from my cheek to my ear. I lay there for a moment, blinking, trying to clear the sudden fog in my head. I could taste something metallic in my mouth. Copper. Iron. I ran my tongue over the inside of my lip and winced. It was split. I was bleeding. I was 68 years old, a man who had served his country, raised a family, and built a career on respect and precision. And I was lying on the kitchen floor, tasting my own blood because my son-in-law had decided I was moving too slowly. Time seemed to slow down. It is a strange thing that happens during trauma. The brain detaches from the pain and starts to observe the details. I stared at the floor. I could see the shards of the broken crystal scattered like diamonds near the refrigerator. I saw a small droplet of my own blood land on the pristine white grout. And then I saw his shoes. They were Italian leather loafers, black polished to a mirror shine with a small silver buckle across the top. Ferragamos. They cost $800. I knew exactly how much they cost, because I was the one who paid the credit card bill last month. Staring at those expensive shoes from my vantage point on the floor, a memory flashed through my mind, vivid and cruel in its contrast. I was not on the floor in this memory. I was sitting at a mahogany desk in my old office 10 years ago. Across from me sat a younger, hungrier Derek. He did not wear Italian leather then. He wore scuffed dress shoes from a discount store and a suit that was a size too big. He had tears in his eyes. He was holding my hand, his grip tight and desperate. "Thank you, Hank," he had said, his voice trembling with emotion. "You are saving my life. I swear to you I will make this firm a success. I will take care of Beatrice. I will take care of you. I will never let you down." I looked down at the check on the desk between us. $200,000. It was nearly all of my liquid savings at the time. It was the money I had put aside for a boat for travel, for the quiet, dignified retirement I had promised my wife before she passed. But I looked at Derek and I saw ambition. I saw the man my daughter loved. I saw the future. So I pushed the check across the desk. I invested in him. I invested in family. The memory dissolved as a shadow fell over me. I was back on the cold floor. The man wearing the $800 shoes was not the humble boy from 10 years ago. He was a monster created by my own generosity. Derek loomed over me. From this angle, he looked like a giant. His face was flushed red, but not with shame. He was not horrified that he had just struck an elderly man. He was not rushing to help me up. He was annoyed. His nostrils flared as he adjusted his cufflinks, checking to make sure his expensive watch hadn't been scratched in the assault. "Look at this mess," Derek spat. His voice was low, a venomous hiss that vibrated in the quiet kitchen. "You are useless, Hank. Absolutely useless. I asked you for water, not a construction project." I tried to push myself up. My arms shook. The humiliation was heavier than my own body weight. I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to remind him of the check. I wanted to remind him that this house, this kitchen, the very clothes on his back were funded by the man he just knocked to the ground. But the words caught in my throat. I knew with a sinking, terrifying realization that he didn't care. The currency of gratitude had no value here anymore. I managed to get on my hands and knees. My vision swam. The pain in my hip was a dull roar now. I looked up at him, waiting for a shred of humanity, waiting for him to realize he had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Derek looked down at me with eyes that were flat and dead. There was no spark of recognition that I was a human being, let alone his father-in-law. To him, I was just an obstacle, a piece of furniture that had broken down and needed to be replaced. He didn't offer a hand. He didn't ask if I was okay. Instead, he did something that broke my heart more than the slap itself. He stepped over me. He lifted his expensive Italian loafer and stepped over my legs as if I were a pile of dirty laundry he hadn't gotten around to sorting yet. He walked to the refrigerator, took out a bottle of sparkling water, and cracked it open. The hiss of the gas escaping the bottle sounded loud in the silence. He took a long, refreshing drink, his back turned to me, while I struggled to find my balance on the slippery floor. He turned back around, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. He looked at me swaying on my feet, clutching the counter for support, blood trickling from my lip onto my chin. "Lo, madonsat di trukitoive," Derek said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. "Clean this up before I get back. All of it. If I find a single shard of glass when I walk through that door tonight, don't think I won't put you right back on the floor." He checked his watch, grabbed his car keys, and walked out the door. The heavy oak door slammed shut, shaking the walls of the house I had paid for. I was left alone in the silence, the taste of blood in my mouth, realizing that the man I had treated like a son didn't just want me gone. He wanted me erased. But as I stared at the closed door, wiping the blood from my lip with a trembling hand, a spark lit up in the darkness of my mind. It was a small, dangerous spark. I might be old. I might be hurt. But I was not dead yet. And Derek had just made the biggest mistake of his life. He left me alone in the house with his secrets. Dưới đây là nội dung chi tiết cho căn hai sự tàn nhẫn của con gái, The Daughter's Coldness. Nội dung được viết hoàn toàn bằng tiếng Anh tối ưu hóa cho giọng đọc trôi chảy giàu cảm xúc, câu từ gãy gọn không chứa các ký tự đặc biệt, hay tiêu đề phân đoạn đảm bảo độ dài và chiều sâu tâm lý như bạn yêu cầu. The silence that followed the slamming of the front door was heavy, pressing down on me like a physical weight. I remained on the kitchen floor for a moment longer. Not because I could not get up, but because I was afraid of what standing up meant. If I stood up, I had to acknowledge that the man I welcomed into my family had just struck me. If I stood up, I had to face the reality of my own blood on the tiles. My hip throbbed with a dull, aching rhythm, sinking with the sharp sting on my cheek, but I forced myself to move. I was a father. I was a grandfather. I would not be found cowering on the floor like a beaten animal. I heard the soft click of heels on the staircase. It was a sound I used to love the sound of my daughter Beatrice coming down for breakfast. In my memory, she was still the little girl who would run down those stairs in her pajamas to show me a drawing. But the rhythm of these steps was different. It was slow, deliberate, and cold. I used the countertop to pull myself upright, my joints protesting, my hand trembling as I reached for a paper towel to dab at my split lip. I wanted to hide the blood. Instinctively, I still wanted to protect her. I did not want her to see her husband's violence. I thought that if she saw me hurt, it would break her heart. I was a fool. Beatrice walked into the kitchen. She was dressed in a pristine cream-colored silk blouse and tailored trousers, looking every bit the successful trophy wife she had aspired to become. Her hair was pulled back in a tight, severe bun, pulling her features taut. She stopped in the doorway. Her eyes did not go to my face. They did not look at my trembling hands. They did not even look at the red smear on the paper towel I was holding. Her gaze went straight to the floor, locking onto the scattered shards of crystal near my feet. "Oh God," she sighed, and the sound was not one of worry, but of profound irritation. She walked over her heels, clicking sharply on the tile, and stopped just inches from where I stood. She looked down at the broken glass with genuine tragedy in her eyes. "Dad, please tell me you did not just break the limited edition tumbler. Do you have any idea how hard it was to get that set? Derek had them imported from a boutique in Milan. They are not replaceable." I stared at her, the paper towel still pressed to my mouth. The metallic taste of blood was thick in my throat, but it was nothing compared to the bitterness rising in my chest. "Beatrice," I croaked, my voice sounding weak and foreign to my own ears. "He hit me. Derek hit me." Beatrice finally looked at me. There was no shock in her eyes. There was no horror. There was only a weary impatience, like a mother listening to a toddler make up a story. She rolled her eyes, walking past me to the pantry to grab a dustpan. "Stop being dramatic, Dad. Derek did not hit you. You probably stumbled again. You are always stumbling lately. Your balance is terrible. I have told you 1,000 times to be more careful when you are handling expensive things." I lowered the paper towel, revealing the swelling cut on my lip. "Look, B. Look at my face. Does this look like I stumbled?" She glanced at my injury for a fraction of a second, her expression unchanging. "It looks like you were clumsy," she said coldly, kneeling down to sweep up the glass. She showed more tenderness to the jagged shards of crystal than she did to her own father. "Honestly, it is exhausting. We give you a roof over your head, we give you food, we let you live in this beautiful environment, and all you do is break things and complain. Do you know how stressful it is for Derek right now? He is managing millions of dollars. He has the weight of the world on his shoulders. The last thing he needs is to come home to a chaotic kitchen and a father-in-law who cannot hold a glass of water." I felt a coldness spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. It was the chill of absolute abandonment. I watched the top of her head as she meticulously cleaned the floor, ensuring not a single speck of dust remained. "Beatrice," I whispered, "I sold my house for you. I gave you everything I had. I have nowhere else to go." She stopped sweeping. She stood up slowly, the dustpan full of glass held tightly in her manicured hand. She turned to face me, and for the first time I saw a flash of genuine anger in her eyes. It was not anger on my behalf. It was anger at me. "Stop throwing that in my face," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "You sold that old drafting house because you could not maintain it anymore. We did you a favor by taking you in. That money you gave us, it barely covered the down payment on the vacation home. It is gone, Dad. Spent. You are not an investor here. You are a dependent. You are a guest who has overstayed his welcome, but we are too polite to kick you out. So please spare me the martyr speech. You are not a victim. You are a burden." The word hung in the air between us. Burden. It stripped away every layer of dignity I had left. I remembered the nights I stayed up late helping her with her homework. I remembered the double shifts I worked to pay for her braces, her prom dress, her college tuition. I had built my entire life around ensuring she would never feel like a burden. And now she was using that very word to crush me. She walked to the trash can and dumped the glass with a loud crash. Then she walked to the refrigerator. I thought perhaps a small part of her felt guilty. I thought she might offer me a glass of water or a chair. She opened the freezer and pulled out a bag of frozen peas. She turned and tossed it at me. I caught it reflexively, the cold plastic biting into my palms. "Put that on your face," she commanded, turning her back to me to wipe down the counter where the glass had sat. "It is going to swell if you do not ice it." I held the bag of peas, looking at her back. "Thank you," I said softly, my voice breaking. "Do not thank me," she cut me off, spraying cleaner on the granite surface. "I am not doing it for you. We have guests coming tonight, important investors from the city. Derek needs to close a deal, and everything has to be perfect. The house needs to be spotless, the dinner needs to be exquisite, and the atmosphere needs to be successful." She turned around, leaning against the counter, crossing her arms over her chest. She looked me up and down, her eyes lingering on my bruised cheek with critical assessment. "I do not want them to see you looking like a battered shelter dog. It ruins the aesthetic. It raises questions we do not want to answer. So ice that face. And tonight when the guests arrive, I want you to stay in your room. Do not come down. Do not make any noise. If you absolutely must use the bathroom, make sure that bruise is covered with concealer or something. I cannot afford for you to embarrass us tonight. Do you understand?" I looked at my daughter. Really looked at her. And I realized that the Beatrice I knew was dead. She had been consumed by this hollow, cruel woman standing in front of me. I nodded slowly, pressing the frozen bag to my aching face. "I understand," I said. "Good," she said, checking her reflection in the microwave door. "Now go upstairs. I have a caterer coming in an hour, and I need this kitchen clear." I turned and walked toward the back stairs, the ones leading to the small servants' quarters they had assigned to me. I walked slowly, limping slightly, clutching the frozen peas like a lifeline. As I climbed the stairs, I heard her humming a tune in the kitchen, completely unbothered, as if she had just taken out the trash rather than destroyed her father's soul. But as I reached the landing, her words echoed in my mind. Important investors, guests who must not see me. Why was it so crucial that I remain hidden? Why was my bruise a liability to a business deal? Derek had said I was useless, but Beatrice's fear told me something else. I was not useless. I was dangerous. And tonight, from the shadows of my room, I was going to find out why. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the kitchen, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air and casting long, sharp shadows across the marble countertops. It was a beautiful room, designed for a magazine spread meant to showcase wealth and taste. But I was not sitting at the expansive granite island, where I used to drink my coffee while reading the newspaper. I was not sitting at the heavy oak dining table that could seat 12 people. I was sitting at a rickety folding card table tucked into the corner of the room right next to the pantry door and the recycling bin. This was the new arrangement. Beatrice had suggested it casually a week ago, claiming I was making a mess at the main table, but today, sitting there with my bruised lip and aching hip, the symbolism was impossible to ignore. I was no longer the patriarch. I was not even a guest. I had been demoted to the help tolerated only as long as I remained invisible and silent. I stirred my instant coffee with a plastic spoon, the clinking sound dull and pathetic. Across the room, the expensive Italian espresso machine hissed and gurgled, brewing a dark, aromatic roast that filled the kitchen with a scent I used to love. That coffee was for Derek. My coffee came from a jar. I stared into the black liquid, watching my own reflection ripple. The bruise on my cheek had darkened overnight to a deep purple, a map of yesterday's violence etched into my skin. I heard the heavy footsteps before I saw him. Derek entered the kitchen, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop, even though his smile was bright enough to light up a stadium. He was dressed for war or business, which for him were the same thing. His navy suit was tailored to perfection, hugging his shoulders, and his silk tie was knotted with geometric precision. He looked fresh, rested, and utterly unbothered by the fact that less than 12 hours ago, he had assaulted an old man in this very room. He walked straight to the espresso machine, whistling a cheerful tune that grated on my nerves like sandpaper. He poured his coffee into a ceramic mug, took a sip, and sighed with exaggerated satisfaction before turning his gaze toward my little corner. "Good morning, Hank," he said, his voice booming with a false joviality that made my stomach turn. He walked over, leaning against the main island, creating a physical distance between us that felt like a chasm. "How is the lip? It looks a little tender." I looked up at him, keeping my face blank. "It hurts," I said simply. Derek waved his hand dismissively as if swatting away a fly. I know. Look, I wanted to apologize for yesterday. I really lost my temper. You know how it is. The pressure I am under right now is insane. This merger with the overarching tech firm is eating me alive. I haven't slept in 3 days. When I saw that glass break, I just snapped. It wasn't about you, Hank. It was the stress talking. You forgive me, right? We are family, after all." He didn't wait for an answer. He didn't need one. In his mind, his explanation was a pardon. He took another sip of coffee and checked his Rolex. I stayed silent, gripping my plastic spoon. I knew this tactic. It is a classic manipulation strategy. Minimize the abuse, blame external factors, and force the victim to accept the apology to avoid further conflict. He was playing the benevolent leader now, the stressed executive who just needs a little understanding. Actually, he continued setting his mug down and picking up a leather portfolio he had placed on the counter. "I am glad you are up early. I need a tiny favor. Since I am drowning in paperwork for this merger, I need to offload some of the household administration. I do not have time to deal with the contractors for the pool house renovation." He walked over to my flimsy table, his cologne overwhelming the smell of my stale coffee. He placed a single sheet of paper in front of me along with a heavy gold-plated pen. "I just need you to sign this," he said, tapping the paper with his manicured finger. "It is just a standard building permit application. It basically says you, as a resident, give permission for the noise and the construction crews to be on the property. The city needs a signature from everyone living in the house to approve the zoning. It is a total bureaucracy nightmare, but if we don't get it in by noon, the whole project gets delayed another month." I looked at the paper. It was folded in a way that only the signature line at the bottom was clearly visible. The rest of the text was dense, single-spaced, and covered by his hand as he leaned on the table. "Just sign right there at the X, Hank," he urged, his voice tight with a fake urgency. "The courier is waiting outside. I have to run." I looked at his hand. It was steady. Too steady. A man who had allegedly not slept in 3 days should have a tremor, a sign of fatigue. Derek was as calm as a surgeon. My instincts, honed by 40 years of auditing fraudulent accounts and catching liars in depositions, began to scream. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Why would the city need my signature? I didn't own the house. My name wasn't on the deed. I was just an occupant. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my reading glasses. The frames were bent slightly from when I fell yesterday, sitting crooked on my nose. I saw a flicker of annoyance cross Derek's face. "Come on, Hank, it is just a permit." He snapped the mask of kindness, slipping for a fraction of a second. "You do not need to read the fine print. It is standard boilerplate language." I didn't look up. I moved my hand slowly, deliberately pushing his hand aside to smooth out the paper. "I am an old accountant, Derek," I said, my voice raspy but steady. "I never sign anything I haven't read. It is a bad habit." I saw his jaw clench. He wanted to snatch the paper away. I could feel it radiating off him. But he couldn't. Not without admitting that he was hiding something. He had to play the game. He had to pretend this was innocent. "Fine," he huffed, checking his watch again. "But make it quick, I am late. I adjusted my glasses and began to read. The text was small, deliberately difficult to decipher without focus. I scanned the first paragraph. It wasn't about zoning. It wasn't about construction noise. It wasn't about a pool house. My heart began to hammer against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the silence of the kitchen. I read the words again just to be sure. I blinked, hoping my eyes were deceiving me, hoping that my paranoia had finally gotten the better of me. But the words remained the same. In bold, capitalized letters at the very top of the document, hidden under the fold Derek had made, were the words, "Durable power of attorney." I read on my blood running cold. This wasn't a permit. This document granted Derek Kerr full legal authority over my finances, my medical decisions, and my remaining assets. It gave him the power to liquidate my retirement accounts. It gave him the power to commit me to a state-run facility if he deemed me mentally unfit. It gave him the power to pull the plug if I was on life support. This was not a request for help. This was a death warrant signed in ink. He wasn't just trying to manage me. He was trying to own me. He wanted to strip me of my legal personhood. He knew about the account I had kept secret, the small emergency fund I had managed to hold on to. No, he couldn't know about that. This was a blanket grab. He wanted to ensure that if I ever tried to leave or if I ever tried to fight back, he would have the legal paper shield to stop me. He could declare me incompetent and lock me away, and this piece of paper would make it all legal. I felt a wave of nausea, but I swallowed it down. I looked at the bottom of the page. The date was already filled in. He had prepared this days ago. The slap yesterday wasn't just stress. It was the beginning of the breakdown, the conditioning to make me compliant. I looked up at Derek. He was smiling again, that shark-like empty smile. "Well," he asked, tapping the pen. Ready to help out the family, I stared at him, and for the first time I saw him clearly. He wasn't just a bad son-in-law. He was a predator, and I was the prey. But predators often make a fatal mistake. They assume the prey is already dead before they take the first bite. I picked up the pen. My hand hovered over the signature line. I saw his eyes light up with greed. He thought he had won. He thought I was just the stupid, broken old man eating instant coffee at the servants' table. I lowered the pen to the paper, and then deliberately I let it drop from my fingers. It clattered onto the table, rolling toward the edge. "I'm sorry, Derek," I said, making my voice sound confused and frail. "My hand. It is shaking too much today. The shock from yesterday, I suppose. I cannot seem to grip the pen." Derek's smile vanished. His eyes narrowed into slits. "Just make an X, Hank. That is all I need." "Just an X, I can't," I whispered, pushing the paper back toward him. "I feel dizzy. I think I need to lie down. Maybe later." I stood up, feigning a stumble, and grabbed the edge of the table for support. I watched the fury rise in his face, a red tide of rage that he was barely suppressing. He wanted to scream. He wanted to force the pen into my hand. But he couldn't. Not yet. He snatched the paper off the table, shoving it back into his portfolio. "Useless," he muttered under his breath, loud enough for me to hear. "Absolutely useless." He turned on his heel and stormed out of the kitchen. I listened to his footsteps fade, then the sound of his car engine roaring to life. Only then did I let out the breath I had been holding. I slumped back into the folding chair, my heart racing. I had dodged the bullet, but the gun was still pointed at my head. He would be back. And next time he wouldn't ask. I looked at the empty spot on the table where the paper had been. Power of attorney. He wanted to declare me incompetent. Why the sudden urgency? You don't try to seize legal control of an old man with no money unless he isn't as out of money as he thinks, or unless he is a liability you need to silence. I remembered the phone call I had overhead weeks ago, the one I had dismissed as business jargon. Something about liquidity, something about offshore accounts. I stood up, my pain forgotten. I wasn't just fighting for my dignity anymore. I was fighting for my life. And to win this war, I needed to know exactly what Derek was hiding. I looked toward the hallway. They were both gone. The house was empty. It was time to stop being the servant. It was time to go to work. The silence in the kitchen after Derek stormed out was not peaceful. It was the silence of a held breath, the kind that precedes a storm. I sat at the servants' table for a few moments, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, trying to calm the racing of my heart. The adrenaline from the confrontation was beginning to fade, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. Derek had played his hand. He wanted legal control over me. He wanted to silence me. And he was in a rush. That was the key detail. A man confident in his power moves slowly. A man in a panic moves fast. And Derek was moving very fast. I needed to think, but I could not think in this house. The walls felt like they were closing in on me. Every security camera, every smart device felt like an eye watching my every move. I needed a sanctuary. I needed my car. It was a 5-year-old sedan, nothing flashy, but it was solid, reliable, and most importantly, it was mine. It was the last piece of property I owned solely in my name. I kept a spare pair of reading glasses in the glove compartment, or at least that would be my excuse if anyone asked why I was going to the garage. But the truth was, I just needed to sit in the driver's seat, grip the wheel, and remember that I was still a man capable of going anywhere I chose. I stood up my hip, protesting with a sharp twinge, and walked toward the door that led to the attached garage. I reached for the handle, my hand anticipating the familiar turn, but it wouldn't budge. It was locked. I frowned. We never locked the interior garage door. It was a fire hazard for one thing, but also just an inconvenience. I looked at the keypad mounted on the wall next to the frame. It was a new model, sleek and black, installed just last week. At the time, Derek had said it was part of a security upgrade for the whole neighborhood. I punched in the code. 1988, Beatrice's birth year. It was the code we had used for everything since she was a teenager. The keypad beeped a harsh, dissonant tone, and a small red light flashed angrily. Access denied. I stared at the red light, a cold knot forming in my stomach. I tried again, thinking my fingers had slipped. 1988. The same harsh beep. The same red rejection. I tried my own birth year. I tried the last 4 digits of my old phone number. Nothing worked. I took a step back, my breath coming in shallow gasps. This was not a security upgrade. This was a containment measure. They had changed the codes and not told me. I was not just a guest in this house anymore. I was an inmate. Panic, primal and hot, surged through me. I needed to see my car. I needed to know it was there. I turned and hurried to the back door that led to the garden, hoping I could walk around the side of the house to the exterior garage windows. The back door opened. Thank God. I stepped out into the cool morning air, ignoring the pain in my legs, and shuffled as fast as I could along the paved path that hugged the side of the grand house. I reached the side window of the garage. It was high up, frosted glass, but if I stood on my toes, I could see through a clear patch in the corner. I pressed my face against the cold glass, cupping my hands around my eyes to block out the glare. The garage was a cavernous space big enough for 3 cars. Derek's spot was empty. He had already left for the office. Beatrice's spot was occupied by her massive white luxury SUV gleaming under the fluorescent lights. I looked to the 3rd spot, the spot where my sedan should have been. It was empty. There was nothing there but a clean patch of concrete and a small oil stain from years of parking. My car was gone. No. I whispered the word snatched away by the wind. No, no, no. I stepped back from the window, my mind racing. Maybe it was at the shop. Maybe Derek had taken it for a wash, but deep down, the sinking feeling in my gut told me the truth. I turned around to go back inside to demand an answer, and I nearly collided with Beatrice. She was standing on the patio, arms crossed, wearing a cashmere cardigan, wrapped tight around her thin frame. She had been watching me. She must have seen me try the keypad. She must have seen me run to the window. Her face was impassive, her eyes hidden behind large dark sunglasses, shielding her from the morning sun and from my scrutiny. "Looking for something, Dad?" she asked, her voice light, conversational, as if we were discussing the weather and not the sudden disappearance of my property. "Where is my car, B?" I asked, my voice trembling with a mixture of rage and fear. "I tried the garage door. The code is changed, and my car is not in its spot." "Where is it?" Beatrice sighed, a long, weary sound that suggested I was being incredibly difficult. "We sold it, Dad." The world stopped. The birds in the trees seemed to go silent. "Sold it," I repeated, unable to comprehend the audacity. "You sold my car. That is my car, Beatrice. The title is in my name. You cannot sell a car that doesn't belong to you." "Technically, Derek handled the paperwork," she said, examining her manicured fingernails. "And since you are living under our care, and since the doctor expressed concerns about your cognitive decline, we had the legal standing to make decisions for your safety." "My cognitive decline?" I stepped closer to her, my hands balling into fists at my sides. "I don't have a doctor, Beatrice. I haven't seen a doctor in 2 years because you canceled my insurance policy. Who said I have cognitive decline? Who said I can't drive? I have a perfect driving record. I drove truck routes across 3 states in my youth. I am a better driver than you or your husband will ever be." "Dad, stop shouting," she hissed, looking around nervously at the neighbors' fences. "You are proving my point. You are erratic. You are emotional. Derek and I decided it was too dangerous for you to be on the road. What if you confused the gas for the brake? What if you got lost and we couldn't find you? We did this to protect you." "Protect me," I laughed, a bitter, jagged sound. "You locked me in. You changed the codes so I can't leave. You took my car so I can't escape." "This isn't protection, Beatrice. This is imprisonment." "What did you do with the money?" "It wasn't worth much, maybe $5,000 or $6,000, but it was mine." "Where is the money?" Beatrice stiffened. She looked away towards the driveway where her $80,000 SUV sat. "We put it towards the household expenses," she said vaguely. "Household expenses," I pressed, sensing a crack in the armor. "You live in a $2 million house. Derek wears suits that cost more than my car. You are telling me you needed $6,000 for household expenses." She whipped her head back to face me, her sunglasses sliding down her nose slightly, revealing eyes that were frantic and defensive. "It didn't go to groceries, okay? It went to Derek. It covered the interest payment on one of his bridge loans for the month. You should be happy, Dad. You should be proud. Even in your condition, you were able to help your son-in-law keep things running smooth during a difficult transition. You contributed? Isn't that what you always wanted, to be useful?" I stared at her, stunned into silence. The words hung in the air like smoke. The interest payment. My mind, the mind of a forensic accountant that they claimed was in decline, latched onto that sentence with the force of a bear trap. Derek, the high-flying investment banker, the master of the universe, the man managing a massive corporate merger, had to sell his father-in-law's battered old sedan to pay the monthly interest on a loan. That wasn't just strange. That was impossible, unless he was broke. If a man at his level needs $5,000 so desperately that he steals a car from an old man to get it, he isn't just having a cash flow problem. He is drowning. He is insolvent. The liquidity crisis isn't a stressful phase of a merger. It is a total collapse. I looked at Beatrice. She was adjusting her cardigan, looking annoyed that she had been forced to explain herself. She didn't realize what she had just admitted. She thought she was shutting me up. In reality, she had just handed me the key to the entire mystery. I see, I said, forcing my voice to drop, forcing my shoulders to slump in defeat. I understand. If it helped Derek, then I suppose it is all right. I just wish you had told me. Beatrice relaxed instantly. Her posture softened. She walked over and patted my arm, a patronizing gesture that made my skin crawl. We didn't want to upset you, Dad. We know how attached you get to old things. It is better this way. Now why don't you go inside and rest? I will ask the housekeeper to bring you some tea. I nodded, playing the part of the defeated old man. I turned and walked back toward the house. But as I crossed the threshold, I wasn't thinking about tea. I was thinking about math. Derek was paying interest on a bridge loan. That meant high-risk short-term debt. If he couldn't cover the interest without selling my car, he had no capital. Zero. Which meant the lavish lifestyle, the parties, the suits, the renovations. It was all a house of cards. And he was trying to get power of attorney over me not to manage my assets, but to steal them. He needed a fresh injection of cash to keep the Ponzi scheme of his life going for another month. I walked down the hallway to my room, the sound of my own footsteps echoing on the hardwood. They had taken my car. They had locked the doors. They thought they had cut off my escape. But they were wrong. They had trapped me in here with them, yes. But more importantly, they had trapped themselves in here with me. And now that I knew Derek was bleeding money, I knew exactly where to stick the knife. I didn't need a car to destroy him. I just needed proof. And I knew exactly where to find it. The darkness in the guest room, or rather the servants' quarters, as I had come to think of it, was not peaceful. It was suffocating. The digital clock on the bedside table read 2:14 in the morning, but sleep was a luxury I could not afford. My body was exhausted. My hip throbbed with a persistent, dull ache from the fall in the kitchen, and my mind was racing like a high-speed train with no brakes. I lay on the narrow twin mattress, staring up at the ceiling, tracing the shadows cast by the moonlight, filtering through the blinds. The house was silent, or at least it should have been. But these modern mansions are deceptive. They look solid, built of stone and marble, but underneath they are hollow. The ventilation systems, the thin drywall between non-load-bearing walls, they all act as conduits for sound if you know how to listen. And I knew how to listen. It was a skill I had honed over 40 years as a forensic auditor. In my line of work, the truth was rarely found in what people said loudly during the day. It was found in the whispers, in the hushed conversations held in back hallways, in the panicked phone calls made when they thought no one was around. I shifted my weight, trying to find a comfortable position when I heard it. A thud. Then a voice. It was muffled, coming from the master suite located directly above my room. The architect who designed this house had clearly prioritized aesthetics over privacy. The air vent in the corner of my ceiling connected directly to the ductwork of the floor above. It was an acoustic flaw I had noticed months ago, but tonight it was my lifeline. I pushed the covers aside and swung my legs out of bed. The floor was cold. I moved quietly, ignoring the stiffness in my joints, and dragged the small wooden chair over to the corner of the room. I stepped up onto it, bringing my ear within inches of the metal grate. The voices became clearer. It was Derek and Beatrice, and they were not sleeping. They were at war. "You do not understand," Derek's voice filtered down tight and vibrating with panic. It was a tone I recognized. It was the sound of a man watching the walls close in. "I have been stalling them for weeks. I told them it was a clerical error. I told them the funds were in transit. But they are not buying it anymore." "Stop pacing, Derek. You are making me dizzy," Beatrice replied. Her voice was shaky, laced with fear. "Who is not buying it? The board." "The board." Derek laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "Screw the board. I can handle the board. It is the FBI, Beatrice. The FBI. They sent a formal inquiry to the compliance officer this morning. They are asking about the offshore transfers. They are asking about the liquidity gaps in the pension fund. I froze on the chair, my breath catching in my throat. The FBI. This was not just a bad business deal. This was federal. This was criminal. Derek wasn't just losing money. He was stealing it. So what does that mean? Beatrice asked, her voice dropping to a whisper that I had to strain to hear. Are they coming here? Not yet, Derek snapped. They are building a case. They need a trail. And right now the trail leads to me. Unless I can divert it. Unless I can show that the authorized signatory for those accounts wasn't me. There was a pause. I could hear the sound of glass clinking against a bottle. He was drinking. At 2 a.m, facing federal indictment, he was drinking. What are you saying? Beatrice asked slowly. I am saying we need a scapegoat, Bea. Derek said, his voice dropping to a low, conspiratorial growl. We need someone who can take the fall. Someone who had access. Someone whose signature is on the initial incorporation documents for the shell company. But you set that company up years ago, Beatrice argued. You used a proxy. Exactly, Derek interrupted. I used a proxy, a silent partner. But I can amend the records. I can backdate the authorization forms. I can make it look like the person pulling the strings, the person moving the money, was someone else. Someone with a financial background. Someone who knows how to cook books. My blood ran cold. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. He wasn't talking about a stranger. He was talking about me. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together. The power of attorney he tried to make me sign yesterday. The sudden interest in my past career. The way he had been isolating me, cutting off my communication, taking my car. He wasn't just trying to steal my remaining assets. He was setting me up. He was planning to frame me for his crimes. But Dad Beatrice's voice trembled. You want to pin this on Dad Derek? He is an old man. He is your father-in-law. He is a liability, Derek shouted, and I flinched as the sound echoed through the vent. He is useless to us, B. He is a drain on our resources. But now finally he can be useful. Think about it. He was a forensic accountant. It is plausible. We can say he was the mastermind. We can say he used his old connections to set up the laundering scheme. We can say he manipulated me, the trusting son-in-law, into signing things I didn't understand. But he would never admit to that, Beatrice said. He would fight it. He would testify. Derek let out a chilling laugh. Testify? Beatrice, look at him. He is a wreck. He is bruising, he is stumbling, he is forgetting things. Or at least that is what the medical reports will say. What medical reports? The ones Dr. Aris is going to write for us, Derek said smoothly. I have already spoken to him. For a fee, he is willing to testify that Hank has been suffering from advanced dementia for over a year. Paranoia. Delusions of grandeur. Confused financial dealings. If he tries to deny it in court, he will just look like a senile old man rambling about conspiracies. No jury will believe him. They will see a confused geriatric patient, and they will see me, a respectable CEO, who was taken advantage of by a sick relative. I gripped the back of the chair so hard my knuckles turned white. It was evil. Pure, distilled evil. He wasn't just going to send me to prison. He was going to dismantle my mind. He was going to use my own reputation, my own identity, to bury me. I cannot believe this, Beatrice sobbed softly. It is too much, Derek. He is my father. Do you want to lose this house? Derek demanded, his voice hard and unforgiving. Do you want to lose the cars, the club membership, the vacations? Do you want to visit me in a federal prison for the next 20 years? Because that is the alternative, Beatrice. Either he goes down or I do. And if I go down, you go down with me. You signed the tax returns, honey. You are complicit. There was a long silence. I prayed silently, desperately for my daughter to speak up, to scream at him, to run downstairs and warn me, to show even a sliver of the morality salt I had tried to instill in her. Fine, Beatrice whispered. Her voice was dead. Just do it fast. I do not want to see it happen. The betrayal pierced deeper than any knife. My own daughter. She chose the cars. She chose the house. She chose the monster over the man who raised her. A single tear tracked down my cheek, hot and stinging, but I wiped it away furiously. Sadness was a luxury I could not afford anymore. Now there was only room for survival. But the power of attorney Beatrice asked. He didn't sign it. He dropped the pen. I heard footsteps pacing above me again. Heavy, angry strides. That old fool Derek spat. He thinks he is clever. He thinks he can stall me. But he is out of time. I pressed my ear harder against the metal grate, needing to hear every syllable of what came next. What if he refuses tomorrow? Beatrice asked. Derek's voice rose to a shout, echoing through the ductwork like a thunderclap. I do not care if he refuses. If that old bastard does not sign the papers tomorrow morning, I will sign them for him. I will forge his signature. Beatrice, I have his old checks. I can copy his handwriting perfectly. And who is going to challenge it? Who is going to believe him? By this time next week, he will be heavily medicated in a state-run psychiatric facility, drooling on himself, and I will be free and clear. He is going to that asylum whether he likes it or not, so stop crying and get on board. The shout faded into silence. I slowly stepped down from the chair. My heart was pounding, not with fear, but with a cold, hard resolution. They thought I was a senile old man. They thought I was a victim. They thought the game was over. I looked at the closed door of my room. I looked at the darkness. Derek was going to forge my signature tomorrow. He was going to commit me. He had a plan. But he had made one critical error. He had let the auditor hear the audit. He had shown me the books even if he didn't mean to. And now that I knew the timeline, now that I knew the stakes, I knew exactly what I had to do. I didn't need to run away. I needed to dig in, because tomorrow wasn't going to be the day I went to the asylum. Tomorrow was going to be the day I started gathering the evidence to send Derek to the hell he deserved. I walked to the window and looked out at the night. Sleep was impossible now. I had a war to plan. The sound of the garage door closing was the most beautiful music I had heard in years. I stood by the window in the hallway, hidden behind the heavy velvet drapes, and watched as Beatrice's white SUV backed out of the driveway. Derek was in the passenger seat, talking on his phone, his hand gesturing wildly. They were heading to the lawyer's office to finalize the paperwork for my committal, or so they thought. They believed they were leaving a helpless, confused old man locked in a cage. They had no idea that the moment their taillights disappeared around the bend, the old man would stop shuffling and start hunting. I moved immediately to the door of Derek's home office. It was a solid oak door, imposing and heavy, always kept locked. Derek treated this room like a sanctuary, the holy ground of his financial genius. To me, it was just another vault I needed to crack. I didn't have a key, and the digital keypad was beyond my guessing ability, but I knew something about doors in these faux luxury mansions. The contractors often cut corners on the strike plates. I pulled a stiff wire from a spiral notebook I had found in the kitchen drawer earlier. It was a crude tool, but in the hands of a man who had spent his youth fixing engines and his adulthood uncovering secrets, it was enough. I knelt down, ignoring the sharp protest of my arthritic knees. I inserted the wire into the gap between the door and the frame, feeling for the latch mechanism. It took patience. Sweat beaded on my forehead, not from exertion, but from the ticking clock. If they came back for a forgotten phone or a wallet, I was finished. I maneuvered the wire, feeling the tension of the spring. Then a soft click. The latch slid back. The door swung open with a quiet groan. I stepped inside. The room smelled of stale coffee and expensive cologne. It was cold, the air conditioning cranked up high to protect the servers humming in the corner. My eyes went immediately to the computer on the massive glass desk. The screen was dark, a sleeping giant holding all the answers. I took a step toward it, my hand reaching out, but then I stopped. No. That was a trap. Derek was arrogant, but he wasn't stupid. He worked in finance. He would have logs encryption, maybe even a keystroke logger, or a webcam that activated on motion. If I tried to guess his password and failed, or if I left a digital footprint, he would know I had been here. I needed evidence that couldn't be deleted and wouldn't alert him to my presence. I needed the physical trail. I scanned the room. Filing cabinets locked and likely empty of the incriminating stuff. Desk drawers, too obvious. Then my eyes landed on it. Tucked neatly under the desk, humming softly, in standby mode. The shredder. It was a large industrial-grade machine. The bin was full, a window on the front, showing a chaotic mass of white confetti. Derek was the type of man who believed that once paper went through those blades, the truth was destroyed. He was wrong. Destruction is just a form of transformation. The truth was still there, just rearranged. I grabbed the heavy plastic bin and pulled it out. It was packed tight. I couldn't do this here. I needed space and light. I carried the bin to the center of the room, sitting down on the plush rug. I dumped the contents out. It was a mountain of jagged paper strips, thousands of them, a snowstorm of secrets. This was my element. For 40 years, I had taken broken numbers and made them speak. This was no different. It was just a puzzle, and I had always been good at puzzles. I started the process, my hands moving with a speed and precision that defied my age. First, the sort. I separated the strips by color. Most were white, but there were different shades. Bright white printer paper, cream-colored letterhead, thin thermal receipt paper. I pushed the receipts aside. I pushed the standard printer paper aside. I focused on the cream-colored strips, heavy stock, high quality, the kind of paper used by law firms and banks, the kind of paper that carries bad news. I cleared a space on the rug and began the reconstruction. It was tedious, agonizing work. The silence of the house pressed against my ears. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a footstep. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs, but my hands remained steady. I picked up a strip. It had a partial logo, a red shield with a white cross. Swiss. I felt a jolt of adrenaline. I searched the pile frantically for matching strips. I found another, and another. I began to align them using a roll of Scotch tape I found in the desk drawer to hold them together. It was like performing surgery on a ghost. Slowly, painfully, the document began to take shape. It wasn't a contract. It wasn't a bank statement. It was a letter. I found the header first. Zurich. The name of a bank I recognized, one known for its discretion and its clientele of the ultra-wealthy. I found the date. It was from 3 weeks ago. I kept working, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I found a strip with Derek's name, Mr. Derek Kerr, then another with an account number ending in 459. But it was the body of the letter that made my blood run cold. I pieced together the center paragraph strip by strip. The words were fragmented, but the message was undeniable. Regret to inform you. Compliance Department. Immediate freeze. I hunted for the reason. Why would a Swiss bank freeze an account? They didn't care about bad investments. They cared about one thing. I found a jagged piece of paper no wider than a fingernail. It had 3 letters on it. 3 letters that terrify billionaires and criminals alike. FBI. I gasped, the sound loud in the quiet room. I scrambled to find the connecting pieces. I needed the context. I needed the full sentence. I sifted through the pile, my fingers flying. There. A strip with the word request. Another with investigation. I taped them down, smoothing the paper with a trembling finger. The sentence stared up at me, a Frankenstein's monster of truth. Pursuant to an Official request from the Federal Bureau of Investigation regarding an ongoing money laundering inquiry. All assets held in account 459 have been frozen effective immediately. I sat back on my heels, staring at the taped-up document on the rug. The room seemed to spin. This was it. The smoking gun. Derek wasn't just broke. He was a target. The FBI had frozen his offshore escape fund. That was why he was desperate. That was why he needed my money. He wasn't trying to pay a loan. He was trying to bribe someone, or pay for a lawyer, or perhaps fund a run for the border. And he was going to frame me for this. He was going to tell the FBI that the account belonged to his senile father-in-law, that he was just a victim. I looked at the paper again. It was fragile, held together by tape and determination, but it was the most powerful weapon I had ever held. I had the motive. I had the proof. Suddenly, the sound of a car engine cut through the silence. I froze. They were back. They were early. Panic surged through me, sharp and electric. I had the letter, but the room was a disaster. The shredder bin was empty. The pile of paper was scattered across the rug. If Derek walked in and saw this, he wouldn't just commit me. He would kill me. I scrambled to my feet, clutching the reconstructed letter to my chest. I had to hide the evidence. I had to clear the room. But as I looked at the chaotic mess of paper on the floor, I realized I couldn't clean it all up in time. I had seconds, maybe a minute, before the front door opened. I needed a plan, and I needed it now. I looked at the letter in my hand. This was my leverage. This was my shield. But right now, standing in the center of the trap, it felt more like a target painted on my back. I shoved the letter into the waistband of my trousers under my shirt against my skin. The paper felt cold. I heard the front door open. I heard Beatrice's voice calling out, "Dad, are you home?" I was trapped in the office. There was no other exit. I looked at the pile of trash on the floor. I couldn't hide it, so I had to use it. I took a deep breath, and I did the only thing I could do. I kicked the pile of paper, scattering it further, making it look not like an investigation, but like an accident, like the confused act of a senile old man. I let my body slump. I let my jaw go slack. I prepared to play the role of my life, because if they realized I was sane, I was dead. But if they thought I was crazy, I might just buy myself enough time to use the weapon I now carried against my heart. The footsteps were coming down the hall. The door handle began to turn. The door to the office was closed again, the lock clicking shut with a finality that echoed in the hollows of my chest. I was back in the hallway, the shredded evidence burning a hole against my skin where I had tucked it into my waistband, but having the paper was not enough. Information is useless if it stays in the dark. I needed to get this to the light. I needed to tell someone. I walked to the small telephone table in the foyer, the antique rotary phone that Beatrice kept for decoration, but which was fully functional. I lifted the heavy receiver, pressing it to my ear, waiting for the reassuring hum of the dial tone. There was nothing, just a dead, static silence. I tapped the hook switch frantically, once, twice, 3 times. The silence remained. I followed the cord down to the wall jack. It had not been unplugged. It had been cut. The copper wires were frayed, severed with a pair of scissors or a knife. I stared at the severed cord, a wave of cold nausea washing over me. This was not just isolation. This was a siege. They had anticipated that I might try to reach out. They had stripped me of my car, my dignity, and now my voice. I needed a phone. My own cell phone had vanished the day I moved in, lost in the chaos of unpacking, or so I had believed. Now I knew better. It was likely at the bottom of a river or smashed into pieces in a dumpster. I stood in the foyer, my mind racing. Derek was a criminal. He was moving millions of dollars illegally. Men like that do not conduct their business on registered lines. They do not use family plans. They use burners, disposable, untraceable phones bought with cash. I remembered something. A few weeks ago, before the violence started, I had seen Derek come home late. He had been standing in the mudroom fumbling with his keys, and he had dropped a small black object. It wasn't his sleek smartphone. It was a cheap plastic flip phone. He had snatched it up quickly, glancing at me with a look of guilt that I had dismissed at the time. He had shoved it into the bottom drawer of the console table in the mudroom underneath the pile of winter gloves and scarves we never used. I moved quickly, my limp forgotten in the urgency of the moment. I went to the mudroom, a small entryway off the kitchen. The house was quiet. Derek was upstairs in the shower. I could hear the pipes rattling. Beatrice was in the garden talking to the landscapers. I had 5 minutes, maybe less. I pulled open the drawer. It was filled with wool mittens, old receipts, and loose change. I dug my hands into the pile, my fingers searching for the hard, smooth plastic. Panic began to rise in my throat. What if he had moved it? What if he had thrown it away? Then my fingers brushed against it. I pulled it out. It was a cheap prepaid phone, the kind you buy at a gas station. I flipped it open. The battery bar was low, glowing red, but it was alive. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. I had a line out. But who could I call? The local police would see this as a domestic dispute. They would see a frantic old man and a calm, wealthy couple. Derek would show them the power of attorney papers, claim I was having an episode, and that would be the end of it. I needed someone who understood financial crimes. I needed someone who knew who I used to be. A number floated up from the depths of my memory, a sequence of digits I hadn't dialed in a decade. 202 area code. Washington, D.C. 10 years ago, I was the lead forensic auditor on a case involving a massive Ponzi scheme in the Midwest. The FBI agent in charge was a man named Rossi. We had spent months in a windowless room drinking stale coffee and tracing shell companies. I had found the one transaction that cracked the case wide open, saving Rossi's career when his superiors wanted to shut the investigation down. He had shaken my hand on the steps of the courthouse and said, "If you ever need a favor, Hank, even if it is just to bail you out of jail, you call me." I prayed he still had the same number. I prayed he was still alive. I prayed he would remember me. My trembling fingers punched in the numbers. I pressed send. The phone pressed to my ear. I listened to the ring. 1, 2, 3. Agent Rossi, a gruff voice, answered. It was older, deeper, but it was him. "Rossi," I whispered, keeping my voice low, my eyes darting to the kitchen door. "It's Hank Miller." There was a pause on the other end, a silence that stretched for an eternity. I could hear the sounds of a busy office in the background, phones ringing, voices murmuring. "Hank Miller," the voice said, the tone shifting from professional to incredulous. "The man who found the missing zeros in the Detroit audit." My God. "Hank, it has been 10 years. I thought you were retired in Florida." "I am not in Florida, Rossi. I am in hell." I spoke quickly, the words tumbling out of me in a rush. I told him about Derek. I told him about the shredded letter from the Swiss bank. I told him about the account number ending in 459. I told him about the power of attorney and the plan to frame me. "Rossi, listen to me. He is laundering money. He is in deep, and he is trying to pin it on me. He is going to declare me incompetent tomorrow." I found a letter from Zurich. It says the FBI froze his assets. The line went quiet again. When Rossi spoke next, his voice was no longer the voice of an old friend. It was the voice of a federal agent. "Hank, listen to me very carefully. You said account 459, yes. Zurich." Rossi let out a long exhale. "We know about the account, Hank. We have been watching Derek Kerr for 6 months. We know he is washing money for a cartel out of Sinaloa. We froze that account 3 weeks ago, hoping it would make him panic and make a mistake." I leaned against the wall, relief washing over me so strong it almost made my knees buckle. "You know. Thank God. You have to come get me. You have to arrest him." "I can't," Rossi said, his voice grim. "What do you mean you can't?" I hissed, clutching the phone tighter. "He is a criminal. You just said it. We know the money is dirty, Hank, but we can't prove he is the one moving it. The way he set up the shell companies, everything is signed by proxies, and the main signatory on the incorporation documents. It is not him." I felt a cold chill crawl up my spine. "Who is it?" Rossi hesitated. "It is you, Hank. Or rather, someone using your identity. The signature looks like yours. The background checks link to your old credentials. On paper, you are the mastermind. Derek is just the son-in-law who manages the legitimate side of the business. That is why we haven't moved yet. We were building a case to prove it wasn't you, but it is circumstantial. If we raid the house now, his lawyers will throw you under the bus, and with your financial background, a jury might believe it." I closed my eyes. It was worse than I thought. The trap wasn't just being set. It had been armed for years. "So I am dead," I whispered. "I am going to prison for him." "No," Rossi said sharply. "Not if you help us. We need proof of intent. We need proof of coercion. We have the financial trail, but we need the human element. We need him to admit that he is forcing you to sign. We need him to admit that he knows the money is dirty and that he is using you as a shield." "How?" I asked. "He is careful. He never says it outright." "He is desperate," Hank Rossi replied. "You said he is trying to get you to sign a power of attorney tomorrow, yes. He said if I don't sign it, he will forge it." "That is it," Rossi said. "That is the leverage. Hank, I can have a team outside your house in an hour. But we can't come in until we have the signal. I need you to get him to say it again. I need you to get him to admit he is framing you. Can you do that? Can you stand up to him one more time?" I thought about the slap. I thought about the coldness in Beatrice's eyes. I thought about the years I had wasted loving these people. Fear tried to take hold of me, but I pushed it down. I was done being afraid. "I can do it," I said. "But I need a wire." "You don't have time for us to get a wire to you without blowing your cover," Rossi said. "You have to use what you have. Is there a recording device in the house, a smart speaker, a dictaphone? Anything?" I remembered the small digital voice recorder Derek used for his memos. He kept it in his briefcase, but sometimes he left it on the kitchen counter. "I can find something," I said. "Good. Record him. Get the confession. Then give us the signal." "What is the signal, Hank?" I looked out the window. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the lawn. Tomorrow was the dinner, the Last Supper. "Tomorrow night," I said. "He is forcing me to sign at dinner. I will invite a witness." "I will invite you." "Me?" Rossi asked. "Yes." I told him I wanted to invite an old friend, Arthur, to say goodbye before I go to the home. He agreed. "You are Arthur." I understood the plan immediately. It was risky. It was dangerous. But it was the only way. "All right, Hank. I will be Arthur. I will have a tactical team in the van down the street. But until I walk through that door, you are on your own. Do not let him hurt you. He has already hurt me, Rossi," I said, my voice hard as flint. "Now I am going to hurt him back." I hung up the phone. I wiped my fingerprints off the plastic casing and shoved it back into the drawer, burying it under the winter scarves. I stood up and walked out of the mudroom. I felt different. Heavier, yet lighter. I was no longer a prisoner. I was an undercover operative in my own life. Derek thought he was living with a victim. He was about to find out he was living with the wire. The heavy oak front door creaked open, signaling the return of the captors. I was sitting in the worn leather armchair in the corner of the living room, a spot where the shadows were deepest. I had spent the last 20 minutes not planning a strategy, but rehearsing a role. I adjusted my posture, letting my shoulders slump forward, curving my spine into the shape of defeat. I relaxed the muscles in my face, letting my mouth hang slightly open. allowing my eyes to lose their focus. The sharp, calculating auditor who had just coordinated a federal sting operation was gone. In his place sat Hank, the burden. Hank, the confused Hank, the problem that needed to be solved. Derek walked in first, tossing his keys onto the console table with a clatter that made me flinch theatrically. He looked exhausted, his tie loosened, his eyes scanning the room with paranoid intensity. Beatrice followed him carrying a few shopping bags, likely purchases made to soothe her conscience, or perhaps to celebrate the money they thought they were about to secure. They stopped when they saw me. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They just looked at the old man in the chair, assessing the threat level. I decided to strike first, but softly. I stood up, gripping the armrest with trembling hands, feigning a struggle against gravity. "I am sorry," I mumbled, my voice cracking perfectly. "I am sorry about the office, Derek. I went in there I think I was looking for my tax returns. I made a mess. The paper. It just went everywhere. I got confused." Derek's eyes narrowed. He strode past me toward the office hallway, likely to inspect the damage. I held my breath. If he looked too closely at the shredder, he might realize the bin was empty. But moments later, he returned looking more annoyed than suspicious. He saw exactly what I wanted him to see, a chaotic mess created by a senile mind, not a targeted extraction of evidence. "You are unbelievable," Derek spat, running a hand through his hair. "I leave you alone for 2 hours and you turn my workspace into a hamster cage. This is exactly why we cannot keep doing this, Hank. This is why things have to change." Beatrice set her bags down and walked over to me, her face arranged in a mask of pity that barely covered her disgust. "Dad, sit down before you fall over. You look pale." I sank back into the chair, clutching my knees. "I am just tired, Bea. I am so tired of being confused. I don't want to be a trouble to you anymore." This was the opening they had been waiting for. I saw Derek and Beatrice exchange a glance. It was a look of predatory triumph. They thought I had finally broken. They thought the isolation and the gaslighting had worked. Derek walked over and sat on the coffee table in front of me, invading my personal space. He leaned in his cologne, smelling of expensive musk and desperation. "Hank, listen to me. We want to help you. We really do. But we cannot help you if you are fighting us. That document I showed you this morning, the power of attorney. It is the only way we can protect you. If you sign it, we can get you the professional care you need. We can find a place where doctors can watch you 24 hours a day. You won't have to worry about taxes or papers or driving ever again." Doesn't that sound better? I looked into his eyes. I saw the greed dancing behind his pupils. He wasn't seeing a father-in-law. He was seeing a signature that would unlock millions of dollars and a scapegoat for his prison sentence. I let a single tear roll down my cheek. It wasn't hard to cry. I just had to think about the little girl Beatrice used to be. "You want to put me in a home?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "It is a facility, Dad," Beatrice corrected, standing behind Derek like a loyal lieutenant. "A luxury facility. It is for your own good." I took a deep, shuddering breath, looking from one to the other. I pretended to weigh my options, pretended to struggle with the decision. Silence stretched in the room, thick and heavy. I let them sweat for a few seconds. "Okay," I said softly. Derek froze. "Okay. You mean you will sign?" I nodded, slowly wiping my eyes with the back of my hand. "I will sign. I do not want to be a burden. If you say I am sick, then I must be sick. I trust you, Derek. You are the smart one." I watched the tension drain from Derek's shoulders. He let out a laugh, a sound of pure relief. That is great, Hank. That is the right decision. I have the papers right here in my briefcase. We can do it right now." He reached for his bag, eager to seal the deal, but I raised a hand to stop him. "Not tonight," I said. Derek stopped, his hand hovering over the leather latch. What? Why not? My hand is shaking too much, I said, lifting my right hand to show the tremor I was forcing into my fingers. And I am hungry. I haven't eaten all day. I want to do this right. I want to leave with dignity. What do you want? Hank Derek asked, his impatience creeping back into his tone. I looked at Beatrice. I want to cook a dinner, one last family dinner, tomorrow night. I want to make my famous pot roast. I want us to sit at the big table, use the good china, and eat together like a real family. After dinner, when I am full and happy, I will sign whatever you want. And then you can take me to the facility. Beatrice looked at Derek. I could see them doing the mental calculus. One more day. Could they wait one more day? The FBI was closing in, but 24 hours wouldn't break them. And if a pot roast was the price for my complete surrender, it was a cheap price to pay. Derek sighed, standing up and buttoning his jacket. Fine. Make your dinner. But tomorrow night is the deadline, Hank. No more excuses. No more shaking hands. You sign the papers after dessert, or I am calling the lawyers, and we are doing this the hard way. I nodded humbly. Thank you, Derek. Thank you for being patient with an old man. I waited until they turned to leave the room, headed for the kitchen to pour themselves a celebratory drink. They were already celebrating their victory. They were already spending the money they thought they had stolen. I needed to set the final piece of the trap. Oh, one more thing, I called out, making my voice sound small and hesitant. Derek stopped in the doorway, not bothering to turn around. What is it now, since it is my last night here? I continued, wringing my hands together. I was hoping I could invite a guest. Just one. My old friend Arthur. You remember Arthur, don't you, Bea? We used to play chess in the park before my hips got bad. Beatrice frowned, turning back. Arthur. That old guy with the cane, Dad. I do not think we want strangers in the house right now. He is not a stranger, I pleaded. He is my best friend. And he is in the same boat as me. He is forgetting things too. He is very confused most of the time. I just want to say goodbye to him. He won't understand what is happening. He will just eat the roast and smile. Please. It would mean the world to me to have a witness to my last meal as a free man. I emphasized the word confused. I emphasized the frailty. I needed them to see Arthur not as a threat, but as another piece of furniture, another useless old relic. Derek looked at Beatrice and shrugged. Let him invite the geezer. Who cares? Two senile old men eating pot roast. It changes nothing. If it keeps him quiet and gets that signature on the paper, fine. Invite Arthur. Thank you, I whispered, lowering my head to hide the flash of cold steel in my eyes. You are very kind. Arthur is a nice man, I added, pushing the performance just a little further. He is very quiet. You won't even know he is there. Derek laughed, a cruel, dismissive sound. I am sure we won't. Just make sure he doesn't drool on the tablecloth. They walked away, their laughter echoing down the hallway. I sat alone in the darkening living room, listening to them mock me. They had agreed. They had just invited the lead agent of the FBI into their home to witness their crime. They thought Arthur was a senile chess player. They had no idea that Arthur was the man who was going to put handcuffs on them. I stopped shaking. I sat up straight. The performance was over for tonight. I had 24 hours to prepare the stage. I had to cook a roast. I had to set the table. And I had to make sure that when the curtain fell tomorrow night, it fell on them, not me. I looked at my hands. They were steady as rocks. I wasn't just a cook anymore. I was the executioner. And tomorrow dinner would be served. The kitchen was silent, except for the rhythmic wet thud of steel hitting wood. I stood at the heavy butcher block island, the same one where I had been knocked to the floor just 2 days ago. Today, however, I was not on my knees. I was standing tall, holding the heaviest chef knife in the block. I was preparing a pot roast, a dish that had been a staple in my family for 3 generations. It was comfort food, warm and forgiving, the kind of meal you make to heal a broken spirit. But as I sliced through the thick, marbled slab of beef, there was no comfort in my heart. There was only a cold, focused rage that guided my hand with surgical precision. I seasoned the meat, rubbing the coarse salt and black pepper into the flesh with a vigor that made my arthritic fingers ache. Every grain of salt felt like a memory of a betrayal. The money I gave them, the house I sold, the car they stole, the lies they told. I massaged the seasoning and preparing the meat for the fire just as life had seared me to prepare me for this night. I heated the oil in the large cast-iron Dutch oven until it shimmered and smoked. When I dropped the beef in, the hiss was loud and aggressive, a violent sound that filled the empty kitchen. I watched the gray flesh turn brown and crusty, sealing in the juices, sealing in the secrets. While the meat seared, I turned my attention to the vegetables. I grabbed a head of garlic, the skin papery and white. I didn't peel it gently. I placed the flat of the knife blade over a clove and brought my fist down hard. Crack! The sound echoed like a gunshot. I did it again. Crack, and again. Crack. I imagined each clove was one of Derek's lies. I imagined it was the smirk on his face when he stepped over me. I chopped the garlic into a fine paste, the knife moving in a blur, the blade flashing under the recessed lighting. A younger man might have cried while doing this, mourning the family he had lost. I was past tears. I was in a state of pure adrenaline-fueled execution. I wiped my hands on my apron and reached into the deep pocket of my trousers. My fingers closed around the small, cold rectangle of the digital voice recorder. I had retrieved it from the mudroom drawer earlier, ensuring the batteries were fresh. I checked the settings one last time. It was set to voice activation mode. It would catch everything. The clinking of silverware, the pouring of wine, and most importantly, the arrogance of a man who thought he had won. I looked at the dining table. Beatrice had set it earlier with the good china, the ones with the gold rim, that we were never allowed to touch. In the center of the table sat a large crystal vase filled with an elaborate arrangement of white hydrangeas and eucalyptus. It was beautiful, obscenely expensive, and perfect for my purpose. I glanced around the room to ensure I was alone. The coast was clear. I walked over to the table, my steps silent on the rug. I reached into the dense foliage of the centerpiece. The eucalyptus leaves were thick and waxy. I nestled the black recorder deep into the center of the arrangement, wedging it between two thick stems of hydrangea. I adjusted a large white bloom to cover the small red indicator light. It was invisible. Unless you were looking for it, you would never know that the flowers were listening. I stepped back, admiring my work. The trap was set. Now I just needed the bait. The sound of heels clicking on the hardwood floor made me stiffen. I immediately slumped my shoulders. I let my mouth hang slightly open. I transformed from the hunter back into the prey. Beatrice walked into the kitchen, her nose wrinkling slightly as the smell of searing meat and onions hit her. She was wearing a cocktail dress ready for her performance as the grieving daughter who was forced to put her father away. "Wow," she said, her voice flat and unimpressed. "You are really going all out with this, aren't you? It smells like a cafeteria in here." I turned to her, wiping my hands nervously on the apron. "It is your mother's recipe, Bee," I said, my voice shaking just enough to be convincing. I wanted us to remember the good times. Before I got sick." She walked over to the island and picked up a piece of raw carrot I had just peeled. She inspected it critically, as if looking for a flaw in the orange surface. "You know, we could have just ordered from that French place downtown. Derek hates the smell of onions in his suits. But if this makes you happy, fine. Just make sure you clean this mess up before the guest arrives. We do not want Arthur seeing the kitchen looking like a war zone." I nodded obediently. "I will be. I promise." I am almost done. I just need to let it simmer." She tossed the carrot back onto the cutting board with a thud. "You are shaking, Dad," she noted, pointing at my hand which was gripping the wooden spoon. "You are getting worse. It is a good thing we are doing the paperwork tonight. You are clearly not capable of handling sharp objects anymore." I looked down at the knife sitting on the counter. The blade was 10 inches long, razor sharp and gleaming. She had no idea how capable I was. "I know," I whispered, looking at my feet. "I am sorry, B. I just want to be useful one last time." She sighed, a long, exasperated sound that she didn't bother to hide. "Well, hurry up. Derek is upstairs getting changed. He is in a foul mood because the lawyers are hounding him, so do not do anything to irritate him tonight. Just serve the food, sign the papers, and go to bed." "Got it, I got it," I said softly. She turned on her heel and walked out, checking her phone as she went. I listened to her footsteps fade away up the stairs. I was alone again. I turned back to the pot roast. I poured in the red wine, watching the purple liquid swirl and bubble around the beef. The smell was rich and intoxicating. It was the smell of home, but tonight, it was the smell of justice. I lowered the heat, put the heavy lid on the pot, and let it begin its slow transformation. I washed my hands in the sink, scrubbing away the smell of garlic and raw meat. I dried them slowly with a paper towel. The kitchen was quiet now, save for the gentle bubbling of the pot. I felt a prickle on the back of my neck, a sensation of being watched. I knew the house was wired. Derek was a control freak. He had installed cameras in the common areas months ago, claiming it was for security against burglars, but I knew it was to monitor the staff and lately to monitor me. There was a small black dome camera mounted in the corner of the ceiling, right above the refrigerator. It had a wide-angle view of the entire kitchen. I knew Derek was upstairs. I knew he was likely looking at his phone, checking the feeds, making sure the old man wasn't burning the house down. He wanted to see me confused. He wanted to see me struggling. He wanted to confirm his dominance. I turned slowly and looked up at the corner of the room. I didn't hunch my shoulders this time. I didn't tremble. I stood completely still, my spine straight, my chin lifted. I locked eyes with the black lens of the camera. I imagined Derek staring at his screen, seeing the sudden change in my posture. I imagined his confusion. Why wasn't the old man shaking? Why was he staring right at the camera? And then I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It wasn't a fatherly smile. It was a cold, tight lifting of the corners of my mouth. It was the smile of a man who has just seen the cards in his opponent's hand and knows he holds the winning flush. It was a smile that said, "I know you are watching, and I want you to see this." I held the gaze for 5 long seconds. Enough time for a shiver to run down a man's spine. Enough time for doubt to creep into his arrogant mind. Then, just as quickly as it appeared, I let the smile vanish. I let my shoulders drop. I returned to being the frail, broken Hank. I turned back to the stove to stir the pot, humming a little tune, leaving the camera staring at my back. Upstairs, I knew Derek would be frowning at his phone, rubbing his eyes, telling himself it was a glitch or a trick of the light. He would tell himself that an old man couldn't possibly look that dangerous. He would brush it off, and that would be his final mistake. The meal was prepared. The weapon was planted. The guest was coming. It was time for the show to begin. The dining room was a masterpiece of deception. The crystal chandelier cast a warm golden glow over the table, reflecting off the polished silverware and the rim of the fine bone china. In the center, the pot roast sat on a silver platter, steaming and fragrant, surrounded by the perfectly roasted vegetables I had chopped with so much anger just an hour before. It looked like a scene from a holiday card, the kind of image families post on social media to prove how happy they are. But the air in the room was toxic. It was thick with unspoken threats and the jagged edge of impatience. I sat at the head of the table, a spot I had not occupied since I sold my own house to fund their lifestyle. Tonight they allowed me to sit there not out of respect, but because it was easier to corner me. Derek sat to my right, drumming his fingers on the tablecloth. He had not touched his napkin. He had not poured water. His eyes were bloodshot, and there was a sheen of sweat on his forehead, despite the cool air conditioning. The pressure of the federal investigation was eating him alive from the inside out. He was a man standing on the edge of a cliff, and he needed to push me off to save himself. Beatrice sat across from him, looking pale and small. She kept glancing at the grandfather clock in the hallway, as if counting down the minutes until my execution. I reached for the serving spoon, my hand trembling with a deliberate, practiced rhythm. I scooped a portion of the meat and potatoes onto my plate, moving slowly, agonizingly slowly. I saw Derek's jaw tighten. I saw the vein in his neck pulse. I was stalling and he knew it, but he could not prove it. "Shall we say grace?" I asked softly, looking around the table with wide, innocent eyes. "We always used to say grace." Derek let out a sound that was half laugh, half growl. "We are not saying grace, Hank. We are not here to pray. We are here to finish business." He reached down beside his chair and pulled up a thick leather briefcase. He slammed it onto the table. The sound was like a gunshot. The silverware rattled. The water in the glasses rippled. He opened it and pulled out a stack of documents, the same papers I had seen in the kitchen, the ones that would strip me of my rights and my voice. He slapped them down on top of my empty salad plate covering the gold rim of the china. Then he pulled a heavy fountain pen from his pocket and uncapped it. "Eat later," Derek commanded, his voice tight and hard. "Sign first." I looked at the papers. The text was a blur of legalese, but I knew exactly what it said. It was a durable power of attorney effective immediately. It was a confession of incompetence. It was a prison sentence. I looked up at him. "Derek, please. The food is getting cold. Can't we just enjoy the meal? I worked so hard on it." "I do not care about the food," Derek shouted, slamming his hand on the table. Beatrice flinched, shrinking into her chair. "I do not care about the roast. I do not care about your little cooking project. I have lawyers waiting for a scan of this document by 9 o'clock. Do you understand? 9 o'clock. It is already 7:30. He shoved the pen toward me. "Take the pen, Hank. Sign the papers. Do not make me ask you again." I looked at Beatrice. She was staring at her plate, refusing to meet my eyes. She was letting this happen. She was choosing her comfort over my life. The last shred of hope I had held for her evaporated in that moment. I was truly alone in this room. Well, not alone. I looked at the vase of flowers in the center of the table. I saw the white hydrangea blooming innocently, hiding the small black recorder that was capturing every word, every shout, every threat. I reached out for the pen. My hand shook violently. I was channeling every ounce of fear and frailty I could muster. I wanted the recording to pick up the sound of my distress. I wanted the camera in the corner to see a helpless old man being bullied. I cannot hold it steady," I stammered, my fingers fumbling with the smooth barrel of the expensive pen. "It is too slippery. Derek, my arthritis is bad tonight." "Stop acting," Derek yelled. He stood up, looming over me, casting a long, dark shadow across the table. "You are not that shaky. You were chopping carrots just fine an hour ago. Grab the pen and sign your name." I tried to grip it. I really did. But then, with a calculated twitch of my thumb, I let it slip. The heavy pen fell from my fingers. It hit the edge of the china plate with a loud clatter and rolled off the table, bouncing onto the hardwood floor. "Oops," I whispered, shrinking back into my chair. "I am sorry. I am so sorry. I will get it." I started to push my chair back, moving with the agonizing slowness of the elderly. I saw Derek's face turn a deep, violent shade of red. He looked like he was about to explode. He didn't wait for me to bend down. He didn't wait for the servant to come in. He moved. "Leave it," he roared. He reached across the table, grabbing the lapels of my cardigan. He yanked me forward, pulling me half out of my chair. His face was inches from mine. I could smell the stale whiskey on his breath. I could see the madness in his eyes. "You are doing this on purpose," he hissed, spitting the words into my face. "You think you are clever, old man. You think you can stall me until the banks close. It won't work. I will break your fingers if I have to. I will guide your hand myself. You are signing this paper tonight, if I have to beat the signature out of you." "Derek, stop!" Beatrice cried out, finally finding her voice, though it was weak and terrified. "You are hurting him." "Shut up, Beatrice," Derek snapped without looking at her. "He is playing us. Look at him. He is not scared. He is laughing at us." I wasn't laughing, but I wasn't scared either. I was recording. Every threat, every assault. It was all going into the little black box in the flowers. I am not laughing, Derek." I choked out, my hands gripping his wrists, feigning a struggle. "Please, you are hurting me. I just want to eat dinner." He shoved me back into the chair. My head hit the padded backrest with a thud. I felt a flash of pain, but I stayed focused. "Pick up the pen," Derek ordered, pointing to the floor. "Pick it up. Now." I looked down at the pen lying on the rug. I looked back up at him. I stayed seated. "No," I said. The room went silent. The word hung in the air, heavy and absolute. "What did you say?" Derek whispered, his voice dangerously quiet. I said no. I repeated, my voice still shaking, but louder this time. "I won't sign it. Not like this. You are bullying me. You are scaring me. I want to wait for my guest." "Your guest," Derek laughed, a manic, high-pitched sound. "The imaginary friend, the other senile old man. He is not coming, Hank. Nobody is coming for you. You are alone. You have always been alone." He reached for the wine bottle, gripping it by the neck like a club. He looked at me with cold, dead eyes. "I am going to count to 3, Hank. If that pen is not in your hand by 3, I am going to forget that you are family. 1. I gripped the arms of my chair. I looked at the clock. Where was he? Had I got the time wrong? Had he been delayed, too? Derek raised the bottle slightly. Beatrice screamed, covering her face with her hands. I closed my eyes, bracing for the blow. I had pushed him too far. The wire was going to record my murder instead of my rescue. And then it happened. The sound cut through the tension like a knife. A long, clear, melodic chime. Ding-dong. The doorbell. Derek froze. The bottle hovered in the air. He looked toward the hallway, confusion replacing the rage on his face. "Who the hell is that?" he muttered. "We are not expecting anyone." I opened my eyes. I let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped in my lungs for a lifetime. I looked at Derek, and for the first time that night, I dropped the mask entirely. I sat up straight. I smoothed my cardigan. I looked him dead in the eye. That I said, my voice steady, strong, and devoid of any tremor, "is my guest." Derek stared at me, uncomprehending. The change in my demeanor was too sudden for his brain to process. "What I said, my guest is here," I repeated, standing up. "And unlike you, Derek, I was raised to be polite. I am going to answer the door." "Sit down," Derek shouted, moving to block me. "You are not going anywhere." But the doorbell rang again. Longer, more insistent, and then a heavy pounding on the wood. It wasn't the polite knock of a neighbor. It was the authoritative, rhythmic pounding of law enforcement. Beatrice looked at the door, then at me. "Dad." "Who is that?" I smiled. A real smile. "It is Arthur," I said. "I told you he was coming." Derek looked at the papers on the table, then at the door. Panic flickered in his eyes. He realized he had lost control of the room. He realized the timeline had shifted. Get rid of them, he hissed at Beatrice. Go to the door and tell whoever it is to go away. Tell them we have a family emergency. Beatrice scrambled up, wiping her eyes, trying to compose herself. She walked to the hallway, her heels clicking rapidly. Derek turned back to me, his eyes narrowing. If you say one word, he whispered, leaning in close. If you make one sound, I will end you. I looked at him, and I felt nothing but pity. You don't get it, do you, Derek? I asked quietly. It is already over. We heard the front door open. We heard Beatrice's voice, high and confused. I am sorry, we are in the middle of dinner. Who are you? And then a voice that I had not heard in 10 years, but which I would recognize anywhere, floated into the dining room. Deep, calm, commanding. Good evening, ma'am. I am sorry to interrupt. My name is Arthur. Hank invited me for the roast. Derek relaxed slightly. It was just the old man, just the friend. He turned to me with a sneer. Fine. Your playdate is here. Get him in, feed him, and get him out. Then you sign. I watched the doorway. I waited for the reveal. I waited for the moment Derek Kerr realized that his house of cards had just been blown down by the big bad wolf. Footsteps approached the dining room. Heavy boots, not the shuffle of an old man with a cane. Rossi stepped into the light of the chandelier. He was older, grayer, but he was wearing a tactical vest under his open trench coat. His badge hung around his neck, gleaming silver in the light. He wasn't alone. Behind him, 2 other men in windbreakers moved silently into the shadows of the hallway. Rossi looked at me and nodded. Then he looked at Derek. He didn't smile. Derek dropped the wine bottle. It hit the rug with a dull thud, red wine spilling out like blood. Who are you? Derek whispered, his face draining of color. Rossi walked over to the table. He picked up the power of attorney document. He glanced at it, then dropped it back onto the plate. I am Arthur Rossi, said his voice filling the room. And I think I will skip the roast, Derek. I am here for the dessert. The walk from the dining table to the front door was not long, perhaps only 20 feet, but in that moment it felt like the distance between 2 different worlds. I remained seated at the head of the table, my hands folded calmly on the white tablecloth, watching Derek's back as he marched toward the entryway. He moved with the aggressive stomping stride of a man who was inconvenienced, a man who believed he was about to shoo away a buzzing fly so he could return to the business of crushing a human life. Beatrice sat frozen in her chair, her eyes wide and darting nervously between me and the hallway. She picked up her wine glass, her fingers trembling so violently that the red liquid sloshed against the sides, threatening to spill. She knew deep down in the part of her conscience she had tried to bury that something was wrong. But Derek, blinded by his own arrogance, saw nothing but an interruption. I heard the heavy deadbolt slide back. I heard the door yanked open with force. Derek did not greet the visitor. He barked. You must be Arthur. Derek's voice echoed from the foyer, dripping with condescension. You are late, and frankly, this is a terrible time. Hank is not feeling well. We are in the middle of a family crisis. So if you could just turn around and go back to whatever nursing home you crawled out of, that would be great. There was a silence that lasted too long. It was not the confused silence of a senile old man trying to process an insult. It was the heavy, loaded silence of a predator assessing a threat. I did not hear a frail voice apologize. I heard the sound of heavy boots stepping onto the hardwood floor. 1 step, 2 steps, then more. Not the shuffling of a cane, but the rhythmic, coordinated movement of multiple people entering a space they intended to control. Excuse me, Derek sputtered, his voice jumping an octave. I said, you cannot come in here. Who are these people? This is private property. I leaned forward in my chair, my heart hammering a rhythm of pure vindication against my ribs. I watched the archway connecting the hall to the dining room. First came the shadow, then came the man. Rossi stepped into the light of the chandelier. He did not look like the Arthur I had described. He was not stooped. He was not confused. He wore a long charcoal trench coat that had seen better days, but he wore it like a suit of armor. His face was weathered, carved from granite, with eyes that had seen the darkest corners of human greed for 30 years. He did not look at Derek. He did not even acknowledge the man shouting at his elbow. He walked straight past him, his gaze locked onto me. Behind him, 2 other men entered. They were younger, dressed in nondescript windbreakers and dark jeans, but they moved with a lethal grace that screamed federal law enforcement. They did not sit. They did not speak. They simply took up positions on either side of the archway, crossing their arms, becoming silent sentinels that blocked the exit. Derek hurried after Rossi, looking small and frantic. "Hey, are you deaf? I am talking to you. You cannot just walk into my dining room, get out." Rossi ignored him completely. It was a masterclass in dominance. He walked right up to the head of the table where I sat. He looked at the untouched pot roast. He looked at the power of attorney papers lying on the plate. Then he looked at me. His hard face softened just for a fraction of a second into a look of profound respect. He reached out a hand, large and calloused. I stood up and took it. His grip was solid, warm, and reassuring. "I am sorry I am late, Hank Rossi," said his voice, a deep baritone that vibrated through the room, silencing the hum of the refrigerator. Traffic on the interstate was a nightmare. "You know how it is." I smiled, squeezing his hand. "I am just glad you made it, Arthur. I was beginning to worry I would have to eat alone." Derek stood at the end of the table, his face a mask of confusion and rising panic. He looked from Rossi to the men at the door, then back to me. He realized finally that the script had been flipped, but his brain could not yet comprehend the genre of the movie he was in. He thought he was in a drama about a senile old man. He was actually in a crime thriller. "Who is this?" Derek demanded, pointing a shaking finger at Rossi. "Hank, who is this man? This is not Arthur. Arthur is a chess player. This guy looks like a cop." Beatrice let out a small whimper. She dropped her wine glass. It hit the table, shattering the stem, sending a river of red wine spreading across the pristine white cloth like a bloodstain. She pushed her chair back, the legs scraping loudly against the floor. "Derek," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Derek, stop talking." Derek whipped his head around to glare at her. "Shut up, Beatrice. I will not stop talking. These people are trespassing." He turned back to Rossi, puffing out his chest, trying to summon the authority he used in boardrooms. "Listen to me, pal. I do not know what game Hank is playing, but you are leaving. Now, or I am calling the police." Rossi finally turned. He moved slowly, pivoting on his heel to face Derek. He did not shout. He did not posture. He just looked at Derek with an expression of mild curiosity, as if looking at a bug he was about to step on. "You are going to call the police?" Rossi asked, his voice deceptively calm. "Yes," Derek yelled, reaching for his phone in his pocket. "I am calling the police and I am having you arrested for breaking and entering." Rossi chuckled. It was a dry, humorless sound. "That won't be necessary, Mr. Kerr. We are already here." Derek froze his hand halfway to his pocket. "What?" Rossi reached into his coat. The movement was slow and deliberate. Derek flinched, stepping back, his eyes widening in sudden terror, perhaps expecting a weapon. In a way, it was a weapon. Rossi pulled out a leather wallet. He flipped it open with a snap of his wrist and tossed it onto the table. It landed with a heavy thud right on top of the power of attorney document. The gold badge gleamed under the crystal chandelier. The eagle, the shield, the bold blue letters. Federal Bureau of Investigation. The room seemed to lose all its oxygen. Derek stared at the badge. He blinked once, twice, as if trying to make it disappear. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The color drained from his face so fast, it looked like the blood had simply evaporated. He looked like a ghost. I am not Arthur Rossi, said his voice dropping to a low steel growl. And I am not a chess player, although I do appreciate a good strategy when I see one. Rossi took a step closer to Derek, invading his space, forcing him to back up until his legs hit the chair. I am Special Agent Rossi, Financial Crimes Division, and you, Derek Kerr, are the reason I haven't slept in 3 weeks. Derek shook his head weakly. I do not understand. What is this? Why are you here? Rossi leaned in, placing both hands on the table, leaning over the spilled wine and the legal papers. I am the man you have been trying to hide from for the last 6 months, Derek. I am the man who froze your accounts in Zurich this morning. I am the man who knows about the shell companies in Panama. And I am the man who is very interested in hearing why you are trying to force a retired forensic accountant to sign a document admitting to crimes he didn't commit. Derek looked at me. His eyes were wide with betrayal. You knew. I picked up my wine glass. I took a slow, deliberate sip. I looked at him over the rim of the glass. I knew everything, Derek, I said softly. I told you. I read everything I sign. Even the things you shred. Rossi stood up straight and signaled to the men at the door. They stepped forward, the sound of handcuffs clicking on their belts breaking the silence. The dinner is over, Derek Rossi said. You are under arrest. The silence that followed Agent Rossi's declaration was shattered by the sound of a chair crashing to the floor. Derek moved with the desperate, jerky energy of a trapped animal. He lunged backward, knocking his expensive dining chair over, and scrambled toward the French doors that led to the patio. It was a pathetic attempt at escape, born of pure panic rather than strategy. He made it exactly 3 steps before the 2 agents by the archway moved. They didn't tackle him. They didn't need to. They simply stepped into his path with the solidity of a brick wall. One of them grabbed Derek's arm, twisting it behind his back, with a practiced efficiency that made Derek yelp in pain. Get your hands off me! Derek screamed, his voice cracking, stripping away the veneer of the sophisticated businessman to reveal the terrified fraudster underneath. You have no right. This is entrapment. That old man is crazy. He doesn't know what he is saying. I stood up. I didn't use the table for support. I didn't hunch my shoulders. I stood at my full height, my spine straight, my hands steady. I looked at the man who had tormented me, the man who had slapped me, the man who had planned to erase my existence. I am not crazy, Derek, I said, my voice cutting through his shouting like a razor blade. And I am certainly not confused. Derek stopped struggling for a moment, staring at me with wide, disbelief-filled eyes. He looked at my hands, which were no longer shaking. He looked at my face, which held no trace of the dementia I had feigned for weeks. You were faking, he whispered. I walked slowly around the table. The sound of my footsteps on the hardwood was steady and ominous. I stopped right in front of him. Beatrice was sobbing now, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking. She knew, she realized that the game was over, and she had bet on the wrong horse. I was not faking, Derek, I said calmly. I was working. You forgot who I am. You forgot that before I was your father-in-law, before I was a retiree, I was the man companies called when they couldn't find the money. I spent 40 years hunting men like you, men who think they are smarter than the system, men who think they can hide their greed in shell companies and offshore accounts. I reached onto the table and picked up the heavy crystal vase filled with the white hydrangeas. I held it out toward him. You wanted a witness, Derek, you have one. I reached into the flowers, pushing aside the wet stems, and pulled out the small black digital recorder. The red light was still blinking, a steady, unblinking eye that had seen everything. I recorded it all. I said, holding the device up so he could see it clearly. I recorded you admitting to the money laundering. I recorded you threatening to forge my signature. I recorded you plotting with Dr. Aris to have me committed. And tonight, I recorded you assaulting me and trying to force me to sign under duress. Derek's face went gray. He looked at the recorder as if it were a poisonous snake. Beatrice looked up, mascara running down her cheeks. "Dad, please," she choked out. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know he was doing those things." I turned my gaze to my daughter. It was the hardest thing I have ever had to do. I looked at the child I had raised and the woman I had sacrificed everything for, and I saw only a stranger. "Stop it, Bea," I said softly, but with a finality that made her flinch. "Do not lie to me. Not now. I heard you last night. I heard you in the bedroom. You knew he was framing me. You knew he was going to send me to an asylum, and you agreed to it because you didn't want to lose the house. You chose a pile of bricks over your own father." Beatrice opened her mouth to argue, but no words came out. The truth was naked in the room, ugly and undeniable. She slumped back in her chair, defeated. Rossi stepped forward, taking the recorder from my hand. He slipped it into an evidence bag he had pulled from his coat pocket. "This is the nail in the coffin," Rossi said, looking at Derek with cold satisfaction. "Money laundering is one thing, but elder abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud. Kidnapping, you are looking at 20 years, Derek. Minimum." Derek's knees gave out. The agents held him up, keeping him from collapsing onto the floor. He looked at the table, his eyes locking onto the power of attorney document lying on the china plate. A spark of madness returned to his eyes. "It doesn't matter," he stammered, grasping at straws. He agreed to sign. He said it verbally. "We have a verbal contract. He is incompetent. I am his guardian." I laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound. "You still don't get it, do you?" I picked up the document. The paper was heavy, expensive, the kind used for important legal matters. I looked at the lines where he had wanted me to sign away my life. I looked at the clauses that would have given him the power to silence me forever. I held the paper up in front of his face. I gripped the top edge with both hands. "You thought I was going to sign this to save myself," I said. "You thought I was weak." I tore the paper in half. The sound was loud, a sharp rip that echoed in the silent room. Derek flinched as if I had slapped him. I put the two halves together and tore them again. And again. I shredded the document with my bare hands, turning his weapon into confetti. I let the pieces flutter down onto the floor, landing on his polished Italian shoes. "I didn't sign this to save you, Derek," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "I signed your arrest warrant. And unlike the papers you tried to make me sign, this one is permanent." Rossi nodded to the agents. "Take him." Derek began to scream as they dragged him toward the door. Not words, just inarticulate sounds of rage and terror. He kicked and thrashed, knocking over a side table, shattering a lamp. The chaos was absolute, but I felt a strange, cold calm in the center of it. I watched as they hauled him out into the night, the flashing lights of the police cruisers finally visible through the front windows, painting the room in strokes of red and blue. Beatrice did not run after her husband. She slid out of her chair and fell to her knees on the rug. She crawled toward me, grabbing the hem of my trousers. Her hands were shaking. She looked up at me, her face a ruin of tears and makeup. "Dad, please," she sobbed. "You have to help me. They will take everything. They will take the house. They will seize the accounts. I will have nowhere to go. I am your daughter. You cannot let me end up on the street." I looked down at her. I remembered the little girl who used to hold my hand crossing the street. But I also remembered the woman who yesterday told me to cover my bruises because I was an embarrassment to her aesthetic. I remembered the woman who sold my car to pay interest on a loan. I remembered the woman who was willing to let me die in a state facility so she could keep her country club membership. I gently but firmly pulled my leg away from her grasp. I took a step back, creating a distance between us that was far wider than the physical space. "You are right, Beatrice," I said, my voice void of the warmth she was desperately looking for. "They will take the house. It was bought with stolen money. They will take the cars. They will take the jewelry." "But Dad," she wailed, clutching her chest. "What will I do? I have nothing." I looked around the opulent dining room, at the crystal chandelier, at the spilled wine, at the torn paper on the floor. "You have exactly what you gave me, Beatrice," I said. She froze, looking up at me with terrified eyes. "You have nothing," I continued. "You have no home, you have no money, and you have no family. Because the father you are crying for died the moment you decided he was disposable." I turned my back on her. I walked toward the front door where Rossi was waiting for me. I didn't look back at the woman weeping on the floor. I stepped out into the cool night air, taking the first breath of freedom I had tasted in months. The nightmare was over, but the lesson was just beginning. I stood on the porch step, looking down at the woman who used to be my little girl. Beatrice was huddled on the cold stone, her expensive dress ruined by the dust and her own desperation. She was weeping deep, racking sobs that shook her thin frame, the kind of crying that usually breaks a father's heart. But as I looked at her, I felt a strange, hollow silence in my chest, where that sympathy used to be. It was not that I stopped loving her. It was that I finally respected myself enough to stop letting her love for money destroy me. The flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers reflected in the windows of the massive house behind us, turning the dream home into a carnival of consequences. She reached out a trembling hand toward me, grasping at the cuff of my trousers, her fingers frantic and weak. "Dad," she choked out, her voice raw. "You cannot just leave. You cannot leave me here alone. I do not know what to do. I do not know how to fix this." I gently pulled my leg away, stepping down onto the driveway. I looked at her, really looked at her for the last time. "There is nothing to fix, Beatrice," I said, my voice steady and calm, carrying over the distant sound of the sirens. "It is already broken. And as for leaving you alone, I am not leaving you alone. You made your choice weeks ago. You chose to be alone with Derek and his ambition. You chose to be alone with your greed." "But the house," she wailed, looking back at the dark, imposing structure that loomed against the night sky. "Where will I live?" "They said they are sealing it. They said I cannot go back inside." I looked up at the mansion. It was a beautiful cage. "The house is evidence now, Bia," I explained, feeling a sense of grim satisfaction. "It was bought with laundered funds. It belongs to the federal government. And even if it didn't, you couldn't afford the electric bill on a place like this without Derek's dirty money." "But I have nothing," she screamed, the reality finally crashing down on her. "I have no money. I have no car. I have nowhere to go." I adjusted the collar of my coat against the night breeze. It was a cold wind, but it felt clean. It felt like freedom. "You are 35 years old, Beatrice," I said. "You have a college degree that I paid for. You have 2 healthy hands. You are not a victim. You are just starting over. And frankly, it is the best thing that could happen to you. Maybe when you have to work for your dinner, you will remember what it tastes like, to be honest." I turned away from her. I didn't want to watch her crumble. I walked over to where I had stashed my old leather suitcase behind the decorative bushes earlier that afternoon. It was battered and scuffed, a relic from my days on the road, but it held everything that actually mattered to me. My clothes, my old watch, a picture of her mother. I picked it up. It felt light. I walked down the long, winding driveway toward the black sedan waiting at the curb. Agent Rossi was leaning against the passenger door, his arms crossed, watching me approach. He didn't rush me. He didn't speak. He just waited, a silent guardian in the chaos. I could hear Beatrice calling my name one last time, a desperate, high-pitched plea that faded into the night air. I didn't turn around. I didn't slow down. I kept walking, one foot in front of the other, moving away from the toxicity, away from the manipulation, away from the heartbreak. With every step, I felt a physical weight lifting off my shoulders. The heavy, suffocating blanket of familial obligation was gone. I wasn't a burden anymore. I wasn't a victim. I was just Hank. I reached the car and Rossi opened the door for me. He looked at my face, searching for regret. "You okay, Hank?" he asked quietly. I looked back at the house one last time. The police were stringing yellow tape across the front door. The neighbors were standing on their lawns, whispering and pointing. It was a scene of total destruction. But for me, it was a reconstruction. "I am better than okay, Rossi," I said, tossing my suitcase into the back seat. "I am free." I slid into the passenger seat. The leather was cool and smelled of coffee and old paperwork. It was a familiar, comforting smell. Rossi got in behind the wheel and started the engine. "Where to?" he asked. "I can drop you at a hotel, or the station if you need to give a formal statement tonight." "No statement tonight," I said, leaning my head back against the headrest and closing my eyes. "I think I have said everything I needed to say." "Take me to the airport, Rossi." "The airport?" he asked, surprised. "Where are you going?" "Florida," I said, a small smile playing on my lips. "I have a friend down in the Keys. He has a small boat. He says the marlin are biting this time of year. I think I am going to go catch a fish that doesn't talk back." Rossi laughed, a genuine warm sound. "Florida sounds good, Hank. Florida sounds real good." As we drove away, leaving the wreckage of my daughter's life in the rearview mirror, I felt a sense of peace settle over me that I hadn't felt in years. I had lost a house, I had lost a car, I had lost the illusion of a loving family, but I had kept my dignity. I had kept my mind. And most importantly, I had kept my soul. I thought about the people watching this, the people listening to my voice. I wondered how many of you are sitting in a house that feels like a prison, afraid to speak up because you share blood with your jailers. I wondered how many of you are sacrificing your happiness to keep the peace for people who would wage war on you the moment you became inconvenient. It is a terrifying thing to cut ties with family. It goes against every instinct we have. We are taught that blood is thicker than water. We are taught to forgive, to endure, to sacrifice. But I am here to tell you that there is a limit. There is a line where sacrifice becomes suicide. And when you reach that line, you have to choose. You have to choose yourself. I chose myself tonight. And as the city lights blurred past the window, fading into the darkness of the highway, I knew I had made the right decision. I was an old man, yes, but I had a suitcase, a plane ticket, and a future. And for the first time in a long time, the road ahead didn't look lonely. It looked wide open. So that is my story. That is how a retired accountant took down a financial predator and escaped a trap set by his own child. It wasn't easy. It wasn't pretty. But it was necessary. I want to know what you would have done. Would you have signed the papers to save your daughter? Would you have stayed and tried to help her even after everything she did, or would you have walked away like I did? Be honest. There is no judgment here, only truth. Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one of them. And now, before I go catch that plane to Florida, I want to leave you with one final thought, a lesson I learned the hard way in the trenches of my own living room. You cannot save people who are willing to destroy you to save themselves. Loyalty is a two-way street, and if you are the only one looking both ways, you are going to get hit. The most painful betrayal never comes from your enemies. It comes from the people you are trying to protect. Do not set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm, especially if they are the ones holding the match. Real family is not defined by DNA, but by behavior. If they treat you like an enemy, believe them and defend yourself accordingly. If this story resonated with you, if it gave you a spark of courage, or just made you feel less alone in your own struggles, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps me share these stories with more people who might need to hear them. Stay strong, stay sharp, and never let anyone take your dignity. See you in the next story.